Carney is an enemy of the United States. It's obvious.
Of course, a significant development when it comes to relations between Canada and China. The Prime Minister said it's a reset of thoughts. How are you processing what we have heard so far about this new agreement, Kyle?
Well, it's difficult to process, first of all, because the Prime Minister said that, China was Canada's largest security threat during the last campaign.
Actually, I think the biggest security threat to Canada is China.
Last night at the debate, you said the single greatest threat facing Canada was China. I'm hoping you can expand on that a little bit and tell me a bit about how our current relationship with the U.S. impacts that threat, and specifically how you would stand up for the sovereignty of Taiwan, given the current chaos and uncertainty.
It is one of the largest threats to, with respect to foreign interference. More than that, with Russia, and is supporting them in its unjustified invasion, illegal invasion of Ukraine. It is a threat within broader Asia and to Taiwan.
I believe the progress that we have made in the partnership sets us up well for the new world order.
Gang, what's up? Aaron, Canadian Looney. Let's check this out. Mark Carney always confuses me. He's flip-flopping on China now, biggest security threat, or signing a great new deal. Whatever. Mark Carney, you're full of shit. Kyle Seaback is going to expose it all. Let's take a peek.
This is, of course, a significant development when it comes to relations between Canada and China. The Prime Minister said it's a reset of thoughts. How are you processing what we have heard so far about this new agreement, Kyle?
Well, it's difficult to process, first of all, because the Prime Minister said that, China was Canada's largest security threat during the last campaign, and now he's praising President Xi and talking about a new strategic partnership. So I think the Prime Minister has a lot of explaining to do to Canadians as to how these two things can coexist at the same time. I would say this, though, if you're a canola farmer, you're probably cautiously optimistic that something's going to come from this because we don't know the full details. It looks like Canada lowers the tariff on EVs first, and then at some point in the future, the tariffs on canola will be lifted. But if you're a Canadian auto worker, this is devastating news because they know that this is going to undercut North American produced vehicles.
You know, speaking about a Canadian auto worker, we have a reaction that's also come in, of course, from Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who has not been very happy about this this sort of an agreement from the very beginning. Let's bring that up for our viewers once again to show what Doug Ford has said earlier today. We have his reaction from X, and once we bring that up, I'll quote the Premier as well. But let me ask you this, Kyle. While the auto sector today is unhappy, we have, of course, Scott Moe, who was in China, very pleased with it. Okay, that's a reaction from Doug Ford. Make no mistake, China now has a foothold in the Canadian market and will use it to their full advantage at the expense of Canadian workers. So that's one premier of Ontario. But the other premier, who is in China with the Prime Minister today, must be pleased that at least canola sector has something to benefit.
I think the question that Canadians have to ask themselves is, how do we end up here where we have to pick a winner and a loser? How have they negotiated things so badly or put the country in such a bad position that this is the only alternative? What we also don't know is, did they put canceling the $1 billion contract for Chinese ferries on the table? Why wasn't that used as leverage to lift the canola tariffs, as opposed to what they're doing, which is giving them access to the auto sector, which, as Premier Ford says, is going to hurt auto workers in this country? The problem is how they've dealt with the Canadian economy over the last 10 years, how they've miserably failed to get any kind of a deal with the United States. Remember, Mark Carney said he was the guy that could negotiate a deal with the United States, which he's miserably failed to do. So that's the problem. We're now in a position where he has to go to China, who he called the biggest security threat to Canada, and negotiate a deal that could be good for farmers, but is going to be very bad for auto workers. I don't think this is very good leadership for Canadians.
You know, that's a good point about China being a new strategic partner with Canada, is what the Prime Minister said while he was in Beijing, and raising questions, of course, on human rights, what happens to that issue, or for that matter, foreign interference. Like CCS has pointed out, China, of course, remains the #1 country when it comes to foreign interference. But let me ask you this, Kyle, about the fact that Canada as a country, looking at our relations with the US, it was required, it was necessary that we had to diversify, and China continues to be our second largest trading partner. So that, for this particular government, became the second most important relationship to diversify and look into.
Well, first of all, I think it's an admission of failure to negotiate tariff relief with the United States. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing is, how do you negotiate a new strategic partnership with a country you called Canada's largest security threat? And there's actually no indication from what's coming out on this arrangement that there will be any interruption of the foreign interference that's going on in Canada, or in fact, the interference that's going on with elections. So what we actually look at is, we've put our economy in such a precarious position after 10 years of Liberal government that we actually have to make these kind of deals with a country that even 8 months ago, the Prime Minister was calling our largest security threat. So this is the problem with how the Liberals have managed the Canadian economy. They also said they were going to eliminate interprovincial trade barriers by this last summer. They failed to do that. Mark Carney promised to get a deal with the United States on tariffs. He failed to do that. They have also not developed our natural resources. They haven't repealed Bill C-69, which prevents development. They haven't lifted the tanker ban. Imagine if over the last 7 years, we've been exporting so much oil and gas to China and LNG that we actually had leverage in the relationship. But this Liberal government has not decided to pursue that. They've made it almost impossible to develop new pipelines, new mines and projects. And this is where the position we've been left with. And it's directly because of the way they've managed the economy over the last 10 years.
All right, so that's a Conservative reaction coming in from Conservative Labour critic Kyle Seaback. Appreciate your time, Kyle. Thank you for joining us on CTV News Channel.
Thanks very much. Happy to join.
Smash the like, hit subscribe. Now watch this depressing piece from Mark Carney. He uses this voice, a few less ums and ahs when he's dropping the bomb. Let's take a look. It's crazy.
Mine is the first visit of a Canadian Prime Minister to China in nearly a decade. The world has changed much since that last visit. And I believe the progress that we have made in the partnership sets us up well for the new world order. It's a partnership with new focus and greater depth and a sense of purpose. And I look forward to realizing its promise and building on it in the years to come.
Carney is an enemy of the United States. It's obvious. He's partnered, as they've been infiltrated by the Chinese Communist Party and radical Islam. They love beta males. They feast off beta males like Carney. They feast off these people. What he did in Beijing was tantamount to an economic declaration of unrestricted warfare against the United States of America. And this is why President Trump's been hammering him. The Canadians, it's your problem, and you better clean it up.
Okay. Canada's broken because we're stupid.
Who cares?
We'll wrap it up right there, gang. Aaron Canadian Looney, get your Canadian federal politics right here. Everyone has an opinion about Canadian federal politics. If you want to watch a little more, check out this playlist, check out this video. That's it. We're going to wrap it up right there. Ciao for now. Thank you for watching this video. We'll catch you in the next one.